Hello, good morning. Welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 70th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Julie Rosenbaum. I'm the coordinator of events and promotions with Jfamily, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on this Sunday morning to the Scaffold Effect, Raising Resilient, Self-Reliant, and Secure Kids in an Age of Anxiety with Dr. Harold Koplewicz and Franki Bagdade. We at Jfamily are thrilled to be partnering with Book Fair to present this event as part of Jfamily's Ask the Expert ongoing series and as part of celebrating 70 years of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair with an entire year of book and story programming. So there's a full event schedule, and any events that you might have missed, you can find along with our online store at culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. That's where you can find the Scaffold Effect and plenty of other hand-selected books. That's also where you can go to consider becoming a patron and donating to Book Fair. We are a community. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible. So again, that's culturalarts.jccdet.org/bookfair. And Jfamily and Book Fair would like to thank the following for their support today: JCC's Opening the Doors program and the Henry Ford Maple Grove Center. So you can see that website right there. We have an enlightening event for you this morning, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube section below, or you can text that number that's at the top of the screen there. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they'll take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're on the YouTube channel, you can like the video and subscribe and click the reminder bell, and that way you'll never miss any of the exciting events for Book Fair. The focus of today's event, again, is the Scaffold Effect, Raising Resilient, Self-Reliant, and Secure Kids in an Age of Anxiety. We have with us the author of the book, Harold Koplowitz, as well as local parenting expert Franki Bagdade, who will moderate the discussion. In The Scaffold Effect, world-renowned child psychologist Harold Koplowitz introduces the powerful and clinically tested idea that the deliberate buildup and then gradual loosening of parental support is the single most effective way to encourage kids to climb higher, try new things, grow from mistakes, and develop character and strength. Our guest author, Harold S. Koplowitz, MD, is the founding president and medical director of the Child Mind Institute, which I am very excited to hear more about today. He's one of the nation's leading child and adolescent psychiatrists and is known as an innovator in the field, a strong advocate for child mental health, and a master clinician. And our moderator, Franki Bagdade, has over 20 years of experience working with children, adolescents, young adults, and their parents as a classroom teacher, academic and behavioral consultant, as well as an overnight camp director. Through her varied professional experience, she has become an expert in behavior modification, ADHD strategies, eating disorders, parenting struggles, and school advocacy. So it is absolutely my pleasure to welcome Dr. Harold Koplowitz and Franki Bagdade. Please help me in welcoming them. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be there.
Yeah. Oh, this is so exciting. Finally. Good morning, Harold.
Good morning, Frankie.
So let's start from the very beginning. When the JCC reached out to me and asked me to moderate this event, and I heard Child Mind Institute, I was so excited. One of my roles, I feel, in my community is people come to me for resources all the time. You know, my child just got diagnosed with this, or I'm thinking this is what's going on with my child. Where can I read about it? And the Child Mind Institute, to me, has always been a go-to place where I know I was going to get good, research-backed resources that are accessible for parents. So it's always been in my toolbox in my career. What's so fascinating and different from some of the clinics that we're so lucky to have in our area is that it's a nonprofit. So tell me a little bit more about the Child Mind Institute.
So we're only 12 years old, and about 13 years ago, I started to realize that even though I was able to build the NYU Child Study Center, which is really a terrific clinical research center, there was always a certain amount of friction between the division or even the department of child psychiatry being in a very big medical center. So medical centers are billion-dollar enterprises. NYU Langone, I think, is a $3 billion enterprise. Child psychiatry at NYU is actually a separate department, but it was a $25 million operation. And so there's always a certain amount of tension that we need to raise money, because child psychiatry just doesn't make a lot of money. It doesn't make the kind of money cancer does, or plastic surgery, or dermatology. There's no procedures. And so this tension goes on across the nation, where there are 120 divisions of child psychiatry that are in departments of psychiatry which don't make money. And therefore, there is, anytime you want to do something innovative, every time you want to think outside the box, I mean, you're just going to lose more money. Even if you're going to make a little money, it's not going to be significant for a very big operation. And we started to, I started with a very independent board. I was very lucky to have a board there at NYU that helped raise with me $170 million while we were at NYU for those 12 years, and decided that we need to look at other models. And the model that came up was St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And for over 50 years, St. Jude's in Memphis, Tennessee, has been laser focused on childhood cancer. And in fact, pediatric leukemia was what they really started with. And the death rate, or the mortality rate, was 94 out of 100 kids when St. Jude's opened. And today it's 4 out of 100. And it was that kind of laser focus that also the idea of pediatric oncology network, people sharing data, everyone saying, we're going to use these 3 chemotherapy agents this year for this. So let's figure out, if we put all our numbers together, we'll learn something. And I think most importantly, the destigmatization of cancer. Having Danny Thomas, having Marlo Thomas, having Jennifer Aniston talking about cancer so that we don't whisper it. We didn't say the big C. Well, there are 15,000 kids in America with cancer. There's 17 million kids with a mental health disorder, which means that everyone listening today knows and loves one of these kids. And if it's not their son or daughter, well, then it's their niece or nephew, or it's their best friend's child, or it's their child's best friend. They're so common that it's 1 out of 5. And we realized that the country really needed an independent nonprofit, that we raise money and then we can do something independent. We can do something innovative. And so for the last 12 years, we've been incredibly successful in doing 3 things: offering the state-of-the-art gold standard of clinical care. So we don't do things at the Child Mind Institute, and now we do them both in California and San Mateo in the Silicon Valley, and in Midtown Manhattan, as well as Harlem and Staten Island. We do only evidence-based treatment. So we don't do play therapy. We don't do biofeedback. There is just not enough evidence to show those modalities work effectively. We then are not typically seeing a kid once a week for 40 times. We typically see kids for 16 sessions, because every session counts. We make our clinicians answer the question, is the child the same, slightly better, much better, completely recovered, slightly worse, much worse, every single time. So therefore, you get faster results if you're looking for that. Now, parents sometimes get upset with us when we say, you don't have to come back until next month. And they say, well, don't you like our kid? We love your kid. It's just that we would rather your kid be playing baseball or dancing ballet or hanging out with his friends or going to a birthday party than coming to see a therapist. The second thing we do clinically is we don't take money from the pharmaceutical industry. So if we tell you you need medicine, we're telling you to use the most effective medicine that has the biggest history with children, and we understand side effects. It's not because a very attractive, very well-educated, very articulate man or woman has just come into the office with a pen, a Post-it, and a piece of pizza to convince me to use, Lexapro, which is 10 times more expensive than Prozac. So clinically, we've seen tens of thousands of kids from 44 countries and 48 states. The second thing we're doing is we're doing research, but what we do with our research is also different. We do open science. We share our data before we publish. So we have a very large study called the Healthy Brain Network, where we're trying to find a biomarker between one atypical child and another. Is there a marker that tells you the difference between an anxious child and a depressed child and a kid with ADHD? And that's really important, because you have to understand that diagnosis in psychiatry is based on history. So the fact that, the two of us start coughing, we both don't have pneumonia. You know, we might, one of us might have an allergy, one of us might have a scratchy throat, one of us might have a virus. It's only the one who has a bacterial infection that gets the antibiotics. And the same goes for inattention. Inattention is a symptom. It doesn't mean you have ADHD. So if we could get a biomarker, we don't have to only rely on good history taking. And we're also looking at apps and trying to develop devices that will make diagnosis better and treatment more effective. And the third thing, which is what you started with, is that we believe that public education is essential. So we spend a lot of money on childmind.org, which has seen 63 million visitors. Since COVID, we jumped from 500,000 unique visitors a month to 2.1 million visitors. So America comes to us, parents, to find out, evidence-based information about distance learning, about how to talk to your kids about race and racism. During the first 3 months of COVID, our Facebook page had a Facebook Live talk for 20 minutes on how to raise kids, quote unquote, during COVID. And we did one in Spanish. We created all of a sudden 100,000 followers who were Spanish-speaking families. And so the Childmind Institute is now finally no longer a startup, but we're not a teenager yet. So we still have some growing pains. We're constantly, during COVID, we started 4 different projects. Morgan Stanley asked us to join the Alliance for Children's Mental Health and take our website from 10th grade reading to 5th grade reading, and to create a family resource center in Spanish and in English. The Stavros Niarchos Foundation asked us to go to Greece and to do a landscape analysis and figure out how we can transform children's mental health care in Greece, which is quite challenging since there's 227 islands and they're still very psychoanalytically oriented and not as technologically savvy as our clinicians in the United States. The third thing we did was we started working with the state of California to create a program that's launching in 3 days called Healthy Minds, Thriving Kids, which is teaching children in California, all public school students, 5 tasks to become more robust, more resilient to the COVID age, which is understanding your feelings, understanding your thoughts, relaxation techniques, managing emotional stress and mindfulness. And the good news is that all of these videos, which cost millions of dollars with professional movie makers, are available in Spanish and English on our website starting January 26th. So you don't have to live in California to get a hold of it. So unfortunately, COVID has been terrible for children's mental health. So while it's 1 out of 5 kids in America have a mental health disorder, 5 out of 5 kids in America's mental health has been affected by COVID. And so we're busier than ever with more challenges, but it's a silver lining, as far as I'm concerned, that everyone recognizes that your mental health affects your physical health. And finally, I think there's less stigma, and this gives us an opportunity to get kids who do need help the kind of effective treatment they need.
Yeah, that's absolutely my hope as well, is that it shined a light on children's mental health and teen mental health, which we've been desperately, those of us in the field, trying to do for many, many years. And we were talking offline about how parents all of a sudden were in this position where they were watching their children do school through virtual learning. They were spending more time with their kids than ever before while trying to juggle working from home and all those other things. So I'm curious from our audience if the beginning of the pandemic had that effect on you. If all of a sudden you started noticing things about your children that you hadn't in the past and that had you looking for resources. And now we're going to talk about how this fantastic book can support our parents. There's so much amazing work being done in the Childmind Institute, and so much focus we've seen on child and adolescent anxiety and ADHD. So why a book on parenting? Why was that the next step?
So for the first 10 years, we had an incredibly tight group of clinicians. There's 65 clinicians working together on the West Coast and on the East Coast for Childmind. And there was a question that parents kept asking. I'm worried about my child. What will happen if I'm not there to supervise homework? What if I'm not there to get them a tutor when they go to college? And most importantly, what will happen when I'm no longer here And how are they going to be independent in the world when they have very severe psychiatric disorders? And we realized that if that is, that by nature in our DNA, we want to rescue our kids, very often what has happened is we're making them less independent. So if you look back at parenting in general, Benjamin Spock, I think, was the most revolutionary. He actually started to get parents to look at behavior and say, maybe there was something behind that behavior. So if your child bites another child, before you just punish the child, what's going on? Why has the child lost control? Why do you, and how do you get your child to not bite again? I think along the way, though, instead of just being concerned about feeding our kids, sheltering them, clothing them, educating them, somewhere along the line, parents got the idea that they were responsible for their children's happiness. And and also that your children were a direct reflection of you. Mm-hmm. And that's a very dangerous position, because that means that if your child fails a quiz, or your child doesn't make the team, or your child doesn't get invited to a party, you could become a catastrophizer, and you could say, oh my God, this is awful. Or there's a permanent record card, it's a red mark. He's not going to go to the right college or the right high school. And we said, we have to step back. We can't helicopter. We can't be a concierge. Can I get you another teacher? Can I move the school? Mm-hmm. And that requires us to be supports around a child as a child develops. The child's the house, and the parents are the scaffolding. And if the parents offer, there's pillars, if you have support, if you have structure, you have encouragement, and then you have planks. And the planks have to move along where the kid is developmentally. You can't have someone at the top of the building screaming down at the worker on the bottom. You have to be in sync. So you have to have patience. You have to have awareness. You have to be able to have dispassion, which I'm terrible at, because, too much screaming on the side of the soccer field, defense, or kick the ball, or being too critical or too enthusiastic. And you also have to monitor, and you need warmth. So these are challenges that we don't always get all the time, but most importantly, we work on them. The other piece is that the scaffold itself has to be secure. If the scaffold isn't secure and something awful happens, the whole building comes tumbling down. Now, I wrote the book along with my colleagues, and all the proceeds, by the way, go to the Child Mind Institute. I wrote that book pre-COVID. I read the book for Audible during COVID, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody reading your own book. It sounds glamorous. You're in a glass box. Your throat starts to get scratchy, also COVID, so you can't be near anybody else. And read it slower, read it faster, Okay. But the concept of the book and all the writing was done pre-COVID. And then COVID comes. That's the catastrophe. So I am telling every parent who's watching me today and listening to this conversation, self-care has become more important for good parenting than ever before. Self-care is truly childcare. If you're not taking care of yourself, if that scaffold isn't secure, if you're not putting the mask on your face when the pressure in the plane drops, you can't put the mask on your child. This is clear during this time period more than ever, because it's shaking us up. And anxiety is more contagious than COVID. So you want to be a secure, solid, resilient human being to be able to help your kids. And so we started to think about, how do you put this into practice? How do you become a scaffold parent so that you can make a secure, self-reliant, and frankly resilient child?
Yeah, and I love the concept of the scaffold. It's so visual. If you've walked through any large city, even in our downtown Detroit, thankfully there's really exciting construction, and you see that scaffold. It's literally giving that building a hand up while it's being worked upon. So it's amazing.
But Frankie, the nice part is the scaffolding goes away, right?
Right.
If we do our job correctly, the scaffolding goes away, and sometimes it has to come back. The shingles are falling off. But hopefully, if we do this correctly, our kids start to scaffold themselves. They go off to college. They can't seem to write their paper. They go to the TA and they ask the teaching assistant, can you give me some more assistance? Can I go to a writer's workshop and get some help? I'm moody, or I'm irritable. I can't sleep. Maybe I should go to the mental health center and get some help. And we hope that by the time someone's 24, which is Right before 25 is when Hertz lets you rent a car. So just when your prefrontal cortex is finally communicating to the rest of your brain, that's when people recognize, I do need some extra help. I need a scaffold right now, or I need to call my parents and I need some help from them. That's what a secure person could do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it makes me think, I do a lot of consulting in early childhood centers. And I was talking to some teachers now, in our third pandemic winter, we're seeing some differences for sure in our preschoolers than we did in 2019. And a teacher looked at me and said, I'm confused. These children really, in so many ways, have won the pandemic. Their schools have been open in person much more than the public schools in the area. They've been able to creatively implement great safety practices and shield these kids somewhat from what some of our older kids have. But what we really start talking about is what they're absorbing at home. So we're doing our best, of course, but parents have hit the breaking point. A lot of us are taking care of ourselves pretty poorly, and it can affect a child. We actually know it does. So what do you say to parents like me who have a to-do list a mile long and all the parent guilt that goes along with it? And I know in my rational mind that self-care is not only essential for me, it's essential for my kids. How do we accomplish that?
So, Frankie, I think we have to keep it really simple, because if someone asks me to do one more thing, I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm leaning in as hard as I can, right? COVID, I thought in the beginning, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I can handle this. Running an independent nonprofit in the middle of a COVID, which means you can't have galas, you can't have lunch. Luncheons, I thought, how am I going to balance the budget? And then you start to realize this isn't going away. I need to, it's a marathon. I have to change my attitude because I'm sprinting and I'm just running out of gas. And I think parents have to do 4 things. All I ask for is 4 things. Sleep a minimum of 7 hours a night, which means stop Netflix, stop looking at your iPhone. Please, 7 hours. I'm not asking for 8, 7. Number 2, eat something green every day. Now, it seems absurd, but most of us are gaining weight. We just haven't been able to. You can't go to a gym as easily. It was hard enough for me to stay on an exercise plan to begin with. I don't play a lot of sports. So that means, too many carbs, eat a salad every day, and we'll talk about how this affects your kids. Number 3, take a walk. Do at least 20 minutes of cardio every day. You don't want to jog, just walk briskly. It's too cold outside. Well, then I'd like you to do 10 jumping jacks. I'd like you to do 10 push-ups. I want you to do 10 sit-ups. And then I actually want you to do some stretching for a maximum of 20 minutes. It's not a lot of time. You can keep the TV on and watch a TV show the whole time. And the 4th thing is do something spiritual. So if you don't get comfort, you can't go to a synagogue, you can't go to a church, then do Calm. Get an app and do mindfulness. Start with 5 minutes and get to 20 minutes. Doing 4 things like that is a great model for your kids. Your kids see that you need time for yourself to calm down your amygdala, to get your brain settled and quiet. It shows them that you care about your body, that you eat healthy, and that you also exercise, and that most importantly, that you actually sleep, that they have to sleep and you have to sleep. Just do those 4 things. Years ago, I was infamous for writing prescriptions to parents who had very sick children, kids who really required a tremendous amount of their time and their effort and their mental energy. And I would write prescriptions saying, go to a motel for 4 hours and don't talk about your child. And the parents said, are you telling us to have sex? I don't care what you do in the motel room, but you could watch television. You could do whatever you want. You want to watch a movie, you just want to talk, but not about your kids. Today, I would tell you on a daily basis, it's necessary to spend those 20 minutes of exercise or, listening to a book on tape or listening to the sounds of the street, or doing 20, and then also doing 20 minutes of mindfulness, because otherwise we will not get through this. This is not over. You mean, I thought July we were done, and my wife and I had a big dinner party outside. We're going to have another one in August, and you know what? We're back. Yesterday I went to someone's house for dinner. They asked us to test beforehand. It's just the four of us, and as we were driving by, we saw a restaurant. It was 27 degrees. We saw a restaurant where several people were sitting outside with heaters. I don't care how good the heaters were. I don't care how strong, how heavy the blankets were. It's absurd. You know what I mean? We're back into this kind of, but we're back in early COVID days. So that makes us anxious. That makes us uncertain. So it's essential to take care of ourselves to get through this.
I love those 4 tips. I think that's so doable. I'd love to hear from some of our audience what you've been able to incorporate, if you think those are doable. And I like that it's a non-essential, because those things we tend to do. Michal, thank you. I love this. I'm walking in the snow while listening to this. The ultimate multitasking. I love it. That's beautiful. I've been trying to even take a moment and say, well, the snow sometimes makes me cranky. I can also see the beauty in it. That's wonderful. Stepping back a bit to talking about modern parenting, and we have helicopter parenting and now snowplow parenting, concierge parenting. How do we sort of reconcile? Gerald asked this question. A lot of us were raised with this authoritarian child rearing, and sometimes those voices in our head, or maybe the real voices of our grandparents around, saying, who's in charge here, right?
Well, that T-shirt, why? Because I'm your mother. Because I'm your mother. Well, it's very interesting. My wife and I repeatedly have said to each other, how come our kids just don't listen to us? Because we encourage them to constantly ask questions and to have dialogue with us. Mm-hmm. But I think that was that shift that was going on in parenting. But there are times where I think that people do forget that parents are the most influential factor in a child's life. That, even when you become an adolescent and the adolescent peer group becomes more powerful than the child peer group, the parent still has the most influence. And that means that we shouldn't keep ourselves quiet. We should make sure the kids know how we feel about things. So what are our thoughts about premarital sex? What are our thoughts about cheating? What about our thoughts about drug use? Those are really important conversations to have with your kids. And it's not just one discussion, it's a real conversation. Now, mind you, you're not going to be able to watch if your child's smoking marijuana or cigarettes or alcohol all the time. But if you've had discussions with them as to why you feel so strongly that one should wait until they're 21 to smoke marijuana, really, frankly, if I could have my way, I'd like them to wait until they're 25, till their brain is totally formed. But, I could settle on 18 or 21, but you have to have those conversations with your kids on a pretty regular basis without shaking your finger. And that's part of great parenting, because we were talking about structure and support and encouragement, but that means that you have to be able, in the book I talk about, big conversations and small talk, and you have to have those discussions. The talk about sex is not one talk, but there's, I have 3 kids. So you get very, very tired by the 3rd child. My wife's gynecologist told her, when you have your first child, and they fall, you run to that child and you say, are you okay? When you have the 2nd child and he falls, you walk over, you dust them off and you say, you're great. But when you have the 3rd child and you hear him fall, you scream out and say, you're okay, come here. And so by the time we had this, our 3rd son was by far the most social. I mean, he was definitely very social, and he had girlfriends early, but we had discussions all the time about, if a girlfriend slept over when he was 15 and she was 14, they slept in separate bedrooms, and, and there were rules of the house. And one time over a weekend, the mom of the girlfriend called and everyone was still asleep. So I said, oh, well, I'll get her to call you back. And I went upstairs and the doors were open to all the bedrooms. And my son was sleeping in a bunk bed, but he was sound asleep. And the girl was lying next to him reading a book. And I said, wake up. This is not what we agreed to. And he woke up and said, nothing's happening. She's just reading a book. And afterwards, we had this whole discussion about what looks appropriate, what is appropriate, what our rules of our house are. And it opened up a very big discussion about intimacy and about reciprocity in sexual interactions, because a lot of girls were willing to perform oral sex and boys didn't do reciprocity. And I have to tell you, I was so proud of that discussion. And my wife then said to me afterwards, well, all you accomplished is you'll never catch him again, because he was ready to dive into the deep end of the pool and sleep at the bottom of the pool just to avoid you. But it wasn't just one discussion. It was clear that we didn't make him understand that certain behavior just wasn't acceptable under our roof. And whether he disagreed with us or agreed with us, that he couldn't sleep in the same bed when he was 15 years old with his 14-year-old girlfriend. That just wasn't acceptable to us. And we were willing to explain to him why it wasn't. Now, it's much easier, by the way, I have to tell you, to walk by the door and just say, this is unbelievable, I can't believe it, and just call your son on the phone and just try to pretend it's not there. And that's a lost opportunity. In the book, we talked about making, living in the moment, catching the moment, so to speak. Well, those are difficult moments to catch. And simultaneously, there's a whole bunch of easy moments you should catch, which I talk about, making memories. The idea that every year I took each child on a trip with me, not always to the greatest place. Sometimes they got Boca Raton. Sometimes the meeting was in Indianapolis. But routinely, our kids knew that when they were with me, we would rent a convertible, because we didn't have a convertible. We rent a convertible. It didn't make a difference. It was Detroit and freezing cold. We'd plug down the convertible. We'd blast the heat. We'd play music. And my kids used to say in the beginning, oh, Dad's crazy he wants a convertible. It wasn't that I wanted a convertible. We were making memories. We were able to stay up late. We were able to have room service. We were able to do things that we didn't do routinely, but it also gave us an opportunity to really talk in a way that was very focused. It's the same thing as taking a jog with your child every day, who's very quiet. Usually by the second round of the jog, the child is going to be able to recognize you're alone together. You can talk about things that maybe are much harder to talk about after school. When you say, what did you learn today? When your children usually say nothing. I got nothing today. So.
Right. And one of the pieces I highlighted a million times in the book is this concept of acknowledging that, yes, we are experts on our own children, but to question that as well. And that's a phrase I use all the time in all of my different parts of my career and being a camp director. I really want to acknowledge that. Like, here's what I think, but tell me what you think is the expert on your child. So why should we question that? Why is that so important?
Yeah. So, I think that, the political environment in the United States now, I think most people understand what confirmation bias is. But it's kind of like, if you're a liberal, you like to watch MSNBC because they will confirm what you think. And if you're very conservative, you might watch Fox, and you like to hear that your thoughts are validated. And so what happens a lot of time with our children is that we decide that our kid is lazy, or we decide that this is the good child or the excellent student. And there's two problems with that. One, it's very bad for your self-esteem if you've been designated the lazy child. And it's particularly difficult if you're the good child, because you're anxious, because at any moment now you may slip. And so we talk to parents about the fact that they are tracking bad behavior. They are tracking behavior that confirms what they think. They are not flipping the channel. They are staying with Fox if they're conservative. And they're not saying, wait, maybe I should step back and I should look at the whole landscape. We tell parents all the time, you have to redraw the blueprint. You have to track all behavior. So if you think you have a lazy child, what we want you to do is, for 2 weeks at least, it's usually 6 weeks, but we say check after 2 weeks, try to catch your child being good, which means that you have to specifically praise when the child is being good. So even if you ask them 6 times to set the table, when they do set the table and they do a good job, you say, Josh, thank you so much for doing such a good job setting the table. It really was very helpful. Josh, thank you so much for telling me such an interesting story. It's really very funny. Thank you. And then you have to actively ignore insignificant off-task behavior, which is very hard. That's like a shiny penny. Your kid is eating with his mouth full. He's talking while his mouth is full with food. He hasn't put the napkin on his lap. He didn't pick up the underwear in the bedroom. You have to actively ignore that insignificant off-task behavior. You only intervene when it's egregious, when he curses at you, when he's rude, when he, throws something at his sibling. Those are times you have to intervene. If you do that for 2 weeks, two things happen. One, your child all of a sudden thinks that his mother has been captured by body snatchers, because it couldn't be that mom all of a sudden is finding good things about me. Number two, you will get more and more good behavior, because by nature, children want to get praised. Students want the teacher to like them. We've done this with schools where we teach teachers the same 3 skills, and we say to the teacher, we want you to get kids to raise their hand. I'm going to, everybody who discovered Christopher Columbus, but I'm not going to call on you unless you raise your hand. So, of course, someone screams out, Christopher, who discovered America? Someone screams out, Christopher Columbus. Actively ignore that child. Then call on Frankie. Frankie raised her hand. Thank you for raising your hand. And Frankie says, Mickey Mantle. No, that's not the correct answer, but thank you for raising your hand. And you keep doing that until you get someone to raise their hand who says Christopher Columbus, if that's the answer you're looking for. And therefore, the message to everyone is that you will be praised for on-task behavior. And therefore, the next time the teacher asks that question, that's great behavioral management for the classroom. Someone will raise their hand. But you have to actively ignore that insignificant off-task behavior, which is very hard for parents, because by nature, we start telling you what's wrong with the picture instead of what's right with the picture. I can assure you that after 2 weeks, things will be better. After 6 weeks, it'll become second nature. You will, by nature, say to your kid, thank you for cleaning up the table. Even though maybe inside you feel like, isn't that what they're supposed to do? Aren't they supposed to clean up the table? Didn't I work enough all day? On top of everything I did, I have to help them with their homework. They didn't say thank you. So when they say thank you, you say, I really appreciate that you're so appreciative of my help. And by the way, if you try this with your spouse, it works also. Your spouse will be more likely to smile and be nice to you if you stop being so critical. So.
Absolutely. And we got a reader question, which I thought was great. And she was saying, she was really proud of herself. She's really working on praising her children for when they clean up after themselves. Again, something we hope the kids just know to do. But she's noticing that even though she's doing a great job praising them and cutting out the nagging, she's still running around cleaning up after them. So what else can she do to encourage that they're taking some ownership over their things?
So it all depends on how old your child is and what your tolerance is to messiness, right? So if we're talking about 12-year-olds, 13, teenagers, there is a certain point where you can actually say, if depending on how you feel about it, I'm not going to clean up your room. I expect you to make your bed in the morning, or just pull, make it easy, give them a blanket or, a duvet that they just have to quickly throw up there. But here is the laundry basket. This is where the dirty laundry goes. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do your laundry unless it's in the basket. I'm not coming into your room to pick up your clothes. So that might mean that they're going to wear dirty underwear once or twice before they figure it out. But it has to be dispassionate. Remember when I talked about that dispassion of not just seething and, being super disappointed in them or angry, being neutral. At a certain point, I remember my wife worked full time. I worked full time. We had a housekeeper. And at a certain point, we told the housekeeper with one of our kids just to keep the door closed. That if he didn't put his clothes in the hamper in the bathroom, she was not supposed to go into that room to pick up the clothes off the floor and then do the laundry. It just, there was a minimum standard that we expected. And we really tried hard not to get nasty or snarky about it. God damn it, how many times do we have to do this? Because then, think about it. Our expectation was that he was supposed to do this. Well, for whatever reason, he wasn't doing it. He didn't think it was necessary, or he was disorganized. After a while, by the way, the clothes always made it to the hamper because there was at least 1 or 2 weeks where I remember there was no clean underwear, and he was so much bigger than his brothers that he couldn't borrow their underwear. So.
Right. I love that. And, it falls right into like a logical consequence. It's not punitive.
But also, Frankie, it also accepts that there's failure. That's a failure, right? You expect someone who's 13 years old to be organized enough to put his clothes in a hamper. But if you step back and say it's his failure, not mine, and we are not going to rescue him, we'll see if we could change this behavior. I mean, he's not particularly organized or neat right now, but he's a grown-up and he can pay his own housekeeper to pick up his clothes. It's no longer our problem. But this idea of failure, there's one episode in the book which is cringeworthy where a mother came to see me and actually says, Dr. Koplowitz, I blew it. And, people say that to you all the time. They're usually harsh on themselves. And I'm listening to the mother tell the story. And the story basically is that her husband works full time. He was away for business that weekend. She was exhausted. It was a terrible week. She came back Friday, and her son Friday evening tells her, oh, I have a science fair on Monday, and here's my project. And the project, she knows from the competition of the other families that all the other families have mostly been working on this for weeks because the son didn't tell her. And it would be these polished, wonderful science fairs. And she's looking around the house. They have cardboard and scotch tape, and it's going to be a disaster. And instead of getting really annoyed at her son, who literally kept the paper in his backpack and didn't give it to her, she lost it. And it was a private school, and she called the teacher at home and yelled at the teacher, how can you give this assignment? You know the kids aren't even going to do the assignment. The parents are going to do the assignment. Don't you know we all work? Blah, blah. I mean, I sat there, and you don't want the parent to feel worse, but you did feel like saying, you really did blow it. This is a disaster. I mean, this is absolutely a disaster. But, I kept those thoughts to myself. And then she said to me, you know what? I realized afterwards, this is, I'm not on top of this kid enough. He is definitely disorganized. I should be checking his backpack. And we figured out a project. And as I expected, she said, we brought the project on Monday to school. It was a mess, she said, compared to all the polished things. It was a failure. It was definitely a failure. The kid got a C or a D instead of an A or a B. And she said to me, by the way, I did reach the teacher on Monday morning at school and apologize for my behavior. And I sent a letter to school with my son apologizing. The son, meanwhile, said to me, the patient said to me, I felt so bad. And I thought he was going to say it for the teacher. He said, I felt so bad for my mother because I made her so crazy. And so it turned out, I have to tell you, it was a teachable moment. They got better from that failure. Mom realized that she needed to check his backpack because he wasn't as organized. When he did start showing her papers early, she praised him and reinforced it. And she also recognized that she needed to have more contact with the teacher because of his very bad ADHD. The kid was by nature very, very disorganized. She needed to have better communication with the teacher so this kind of mess or miss wouldn't happen again. But I have to tell you, though, I'm sure she wasn't proud of that episode, but those kind of failures actually breed, I think, future success for the kid.
Absolutely. And I've been on the receiving end of those phone calls from parents, as an educator, as a director. I've also been on the receiving end of the apology. And you know what? That's meaningful to me. Those
are hard calls. Can you imagine? You lost control. Right.
Yeah.
And it's a great model for the kid to see that I made a mistake. I was inappropriate. And I need to apologize. And it didn't end the world. Your teacher and I are going to still talk to each other. We're going to be working together.
Right. I wrote a few blogs and some articles about how to talk teacher as a parent. And I talk about the times I've jumped to a conclusion, and it didn't take my pause before I sent an email off. So for sure, they're all learning experiences and good things to talk through with our children. I have a great question for Lori. Where do you see grandparents fitting in? How can they scaffold and support?
Right. So I am a grandparent,
Mm-hmm.
and I put two stories in about my first grandson. So one was the fact that he's very attractive, and that's my eyes, right? I see him as being a very beautiful baby, and the evidence for that is that my son and daughter-in-law tell me that people stop them on the street to tell them how beautiful he is. This is when he was 1 or 1.5, and then I have friends who are grandparents, and they tell me how beautiful their grandson or granddaughter is. And the evidence they give is that people stop them on the street. And then you look at the pictures or photographs of their grandchildren, and their grandchildren, to use an expression that my grandmother would use, are miskites. These are very unattractive looking children. And you think to yourself, how is this possible that these grandparents, well, first of all, it's the bias we have, right? Second of all, I think people like babies and young children. That's why they stop people on the street. So I think it's important for us to recognize as grandparents and as parents that we have a bias toward our kids, or we should have a bias for them. We should think that they're smart and that they're clever and that they're beautiful. That doesn't mean that the whole world will see them that way, and so that we have to be somewhat realistic. I think it's very hard to be a grandparent today when your children are better informed than ever before, and they very often are both working. Mom and dad are working. And so I think that it's important that you constantly are checking with your son or daughter to see what they want from you and what they don't want from you. And I think that even though you may disagree with their style or with their rules, that they still have to call the shots. They're writing, you maybe should buy them a copy of the Scaffold Effect. And you have to be very gentle about it. You have to say, oh, I heard this great talk, and I thought, it's interesting. It's a different style of parenting than we did. But I think that you have to be very careful because while there's an old joke that, your children, what you share with your grandchildren is a common enemy, your children and their parents, that's not healthy. You really want to be consistent, because I could tell you that that kind of lack of structure or that kind of division really makes most kids anxious. Even though they think, oh, I could get this from grandma, or get this from grandpa, ask your children's permission. I mean, we really take it to a new level. But before a visit, my wife will usually text my daughter-in-law or my son and saying, is it okay if we bring some presents? And always they say yes. And they say, thank you for asking. Now, my parents never asked, and I would never think of making them ask, but it was a much more open door. And frankly, I think because of COVID, certainly my son is spending significantly more time with his children than I ever spent with my kids. I mean, I went to work, I had breakfast with the kids, I went to work, and I usually miss dinner because child psychiatry is practiced from 4 o'clock till 8 o'clock. So we kept our kids up late all the time so I could read to them. And, they never became good sleepers because of it. But there was never days and days and days where I spent with the kids, where my son, because he's working from home, is able to, come out after an hour meeting and, sing a song or read a book. And I think that, COVID has had its worst effect on 13 to 24-year-olds. They're not getting back junior prom. They're not getting back the quarterback position that football was dismissed. They're not going to get, to be the editor-in-chief of the newspaper if the newspaper was disappeared on them. So those are real losses. I would tell you that preschoolers, they won. You were absolutely right. They got to spend more time with their parents than ever before. I don't think any of those kids say, oh, I really miss daycare. I really think that's terrific. However, if you look at the whole population who are in kindergarten to second grade right now, their reading levels are significantly lower than 5 years ago. The nation really does have to pay attention to the fact that COVID has had a negative effect. You're also seeing more anxiety and more depressive symptoms among kids now than before, which again speaks to a scaffold. You have to be able to say, I'm looking at red flags. I know my kid better than anyone else when it comes to how they sleep, how they eat, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, whether they're an introvert or an extrovert. And if I see a change in behavior that lasts for more than 2 weeks, I am a secure enough parent that I'm going to go get some help. And even if the help is going to look at the symptom checker at childmind.org, which just gives you a differential, I'm then going to call the pediatrician and say, I think my kid may have anxiety or might have some ADD. Well, I'd like to check it out. And the reason I suggest that is that on average in America, it takes 8 years from the onset of symptoms before a parent goes and gets help. If anyone listening to me gets a rash while I'm talking, within 2 hours, they're going to go to a drugstore and get some cortisone. And if in 2 days later it's not gone, they go to their internist. And 2 weeks later, they're a dermatologist. So we should treat psychiatric or learning symptoms in a child with the same respect we give a skin rash to. And so the worst thing that can happen is you wasted your time and money, and the doctor or the clinician says to you, this is just normal adolescence, or this is just the diversity that we see among boys and girls, that girls talk more, boys are quieter, their motor development is faster. But don't hesitate. And that's the message also about the Scaffold Effect, is that we're not ashamed of who our kids are. And if they have symptoms that are concerning, we do something about it, because we're not producing perfect children, we're producing resilient kids.
Right. Well, so I know in Michigan, and I'm sure this is widespread, the wait list for therapy for children and adolescents are long. I know in the clinic where I'm seeing patients, they can't hire fast enough. Worse than we've ever seen it. On the extreme end, getting a psychiatric bed in the state is
nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. Yeah.
Or sitting in ERs, which are not
emergency rooms where sometimes they're handcuffed to the stretcher. I mean, It's absolutely unacceptable. It's very interesting. The state of California, which we've only been in California 3 years, the state of California last year put $4 billion into their budget for child mental health. $4 billion. And one of the things they realize is they don't have enough psychiatric beds. There are children's hospitals that pop up where they don't put a single psychiatric bed because they don't make money on those beds. And I've had these discussions with CEOs saying, wait, you're a not-for-profit. You make money on one thing, you lose money on another. Well, they're going to take a lot of that money and they're going to try to get every hospital to open up 10 beds for either children or adolescents. So you don't want to hospitalize kids unless they're necessary, but there are times where a kid could be so acutely suicidal that or self-harming that you need a place for almost asylum for 5 days or 4 days till things calm down. They're also going to use the money to produce these intensive day programs. So one of the reasons I think at the Child Mind Institute we're able to get kids out faster is that we also sometimes say to someone, come and see us 5 days in a row. Come for 3 hours, 5 days in a row. We're going to tackle this obsessive compulsive disorder. And then you'll come back once a week, then you'll come back once a month, so that I think unless you have some innovative thinking about this, that it's not going to be once a week, Tuesdays at 4:00. We just don't have enough staff. And sometimes the sessions aren't necessary, and sometimes the sessions need to be occurring more often. So I think we're going to have to rethink children's mental health across America. The only other silver lining, I think, is telemental health. The fact that, for many of us, we can see a doctor or a clinician 3 states away, as long as they have a license in our state. You don't have, there's no, transportation. It's much more efficient. And I think telemental health is going to stay with us even post-COVID.
We're definitely seeing that break down some barriers. I know I have patients who are several hours away in parts of the state who don't have great mental health resources. So let's say I'm a parent and I've gone through all the proper channels and determined my child needs help. And I know we're on a few months of a wait list, and this is the practitioner I need that's a good fit for my kid and takes my insurance. What do you say to those parents in the meantime? And we're not talking about a child who is, in an acute state where they need to be hospitalized, but it's a daily struggle. What would you do?
So I have to tell you that I would reach out to other resources. Your pediatrician, and say to your pediatrician, I know I'm waiting to see Dr. Smith or Miss Smith, but it's going to be another 90 days. I mean, it's not just a wait list. I have an appointment.
Right.
But these are the symptoms that are really driving us crazy. He's not sleeping at nighttime, or I'm getting constant complaints from school, or I can't get him to school. Every morning, I'm like dragging him to school. He's so fearful. I need some help from the pediatrician. And the pediatrician or the school can sometimes help. So, for instance, for a very separation anxious kid, they may let him just sit in the guidance counselor's office or the school psychologist's office, and it's a waiting game, okay? And he'll do his homework in that office or in the library instead of in the classroom if he has social anxiety. But we're not going to let him just sit at home. And the other thing that I would strongly suggest is that there are telehealth products out there that can be an interim. They're not designed for intensive treatment, but they offer some really good parenting advice. And sometimes the parent can be can be helped. I mean, the reason we're doing this in California is that we figure every parent who knows those kinds of skills that makes the kid a little more robust. So it's almost the equivalent of I'm waiting for surgery. It's not, I don't need it tomorrow. I can wait the 6 weeks. But what am I going to do in the meantime? Am I going to use crutches? Am I going to have a walker? How are we going to do this? And that's for the richest country in the world, this is tragic in my opinion. But I think that until we revamp the system, we're going to just have to use Band-Aids till we get to the right treatment, but I think you reach out for pediatricians and schools to help. They're part of the army. The reason we do so much teacher education, the reason why we want pediatricians to be the first line of attack is that you have 8,500 child psychiatrists in a country that has 17 million kids with a mental health disorder. That math doesn't work. Do you mean? And you have another 10,000 child psychologists and another 15,000 child social workers, child psychiatric social workers. It's just impossible. So you're going to have to figure out different ways. And teachers are the first line, pediatricians are the second line, and they should be able to help the parent before the symptom gets worse. Because what you want is a holding pattern until you get to that doctor.
So as we begin to wrap up today, if there's one thing that you hope that parents gain from the scaffold effect, right? The $1 million question here. What is the one takeaway that you hope parents leave with when they read your book?
So there is a story in the book where I show my mistake. And that is that I tried to prevent I didn't do it, but I thought about preventing my child from leaving his comfort zone and going into what I call the growth zone. And so my oldest son by nature is socially reserved and very cautious, super smart thinker, but, not the guy who's, he's not a politician. He's not going to go shake your hand unnecessarily. And so he was in 5th grade. And he announces to his mother and me that he's going to do a performance with one of his friends at the Thanksgiving Day assembly, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving at his school. And what the performance is going to be is he's going to do a rap dance to the music of Crisscross as homage to Michael Jordan, who he was madly in love with. I mean, there were posters of Michael Jordan. And I thought to myself, this is social suicide. This is the worst thing he could do, because I have patients who talk about this, 10, 20 years later, how embarrassing it was. And my wife, who's socially reserved, also said, oh, this sounds like a great idea. I was thinking, why don't you do heart surgery on the stage? This is ridiculous, but I didn't say any of that. And the long and the short of it is, he stuck and he said, no, I'm definitely going to do it. 4 days before, his friend backs out. I said, oh, it wasn't meant to be. No, it's great. I've been working with the dance instructor. She's choreographed it, and it's terrific. My wife is a middle school teacher at that school. So she was at the back of the auditorium. I wasn't there. She tells me he killed it. It was unbelievable how well he did. I'm not sure if I believed her because, she thought it was a good idea. I thought it was a bad idea.
Right.
Fast forward 20 years. We're at his 30th birthday party, and his best friend gets up there and he says, everyone knows that I'm very uncomfortable with public speaking, but I love Josh, and we've been living together for 7 years. We went to college, and we've been living together afterwards. And Josh doesn't know this, but I really love him. And the first time I laid eyes on him, I was in 4th grade, and he was in 5th grade. And we were at this Thanksgiving Day assembly, and they announced that Josh Koplowitz from House 52 was going to do an interpretive dance in honor of Michael Jordan. And he said, even I knew in 4th grade, this was a mistake. And yet the stage was black, a spotlight came on. There was Josh wearing a baseball hat backwards, and Michael, Chicago Bulls, very baggy outfit. And he was spinning, crisscross started, he spun around, he flipped over, and everyone got up and started screaming, "Go Josh, go Josh." And it was amazing for 10 minutes. And on Monday, when he came back to school, there he was, as unobtrusive as ever, holding too many books, his head down. But he said, I talked to my parents about that performance and couldn't get over, if Josh could be that brave, why can't I be brave? And I listened while I was sitting there at the 30th birthday thinking, I almost stopped that. I was so afraid that he was going to be embarrassed. And I remember at the time, my wife saying, you don't die of embarrassment. So what? He tried and he failed. And in many ways, I think it was a turning point. The fact that he took a risk, he later on became a DJ for a very long period of time, all the way through college. But there's times where we want to protect our kids where it's actually bad for us and it's bad for them. It doesn't build resilience. It doesn't build self-reliance. It doesn't build security. And so as parents, even though we want to rescue our kids, there are times where we should stand by, even though we think what they're doing is risky, and just be there to applaud them when it works out well, to support them for their effort, because that's what it's all about, and then also help them see how they could be more successful the next time. So please, fight that DNA response of, I want to protect them, and let them try to move out of that comfort zone every once in a while to a growth zone, to try something new.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. This is a wonderful talk. You can find Dr. Koplowitz's book on bookshop.org at the JCC of Metro Detroit Book Fair page. And all of his profits, and they're showing the website up there, all of the profits go back to the Child Mind Institute. So, if you're a busy parent like me and you buy the book and it takes you a while to get to it, you're still doing something amazing. And I have to say, it's a very accessible book. I found that I read things immediately that I could implement in my parenting life. So thank you so much. We love this.
It's a pleasure, Frankie. Thank you.
And I'll let the JCC wrap up things for today.
You're muted.
There. I was listening, and I wanted to stay muted so I could listen intently. That was a great discussion. Thank you, Harold and Frankie, for moderating. And for everybody that pre-registered, I will send an email with all of those links that we talked about, including the one that you see on the screen. And you can make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, so you'll see all of the book fair offerings all throughout the year, and as well as Jfamily and our offerings throughout the year, and part of our Ask the Expert series. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and stay warm. Bye, everybody.